welcome to Citizen Extra. I am Ann Kiguta. We're counting hours to the repeat presidential election, and in studio this morning we're going to be discussing the various cases that could determine whether or not we even end up at this poll. We're live for you this morning at the Supreme Court, where three activists moved to court arguing that the prevailing environment in the country cannot guarantee a credible election. We'll be giving you live picture from that location very shortly. We're also taking you across the country watching for poll preparations by IEBC. While it remains unclear whether they'll be launching this poll at all, in Mombasa, our Saida Swale is standing by, and in Eldoret, John Wanyama will be speaking to us as well. We're going to be talking about also the security jitters that have gripped the country. What are the preparations ahead of tomorrow's poll? We're also standing by for you to bring you some information from the NASA camp. You will, of course, know that they said they will be giving their final position on tomorrow's election at 2 p.m. from Uhuru Park. So we're going to be giving a preamble to that this morning as we look out for what major announcements the NASA presidential candidate Raila Odinga may have to say. So a lot that we're focusing on this morning. Let's start by taking you now to Mombasa, where our Saida Swale is standing by for us. And good morning, Saida. What can you tell us in as far as IEBC's preparations for tomorrow's presidential repeat election?
Indeed, a very good morning to you, Ann Kiguta. Right now we're standing by here at the Chuda Day Secondary School, where this is going to be the main constituency tallying center for Mvita constituency. And indeed, as you can see behind me, there's a lot of activities going on here. Earlier on, I managed to speak to the county manager who is for Mombasa County, who is Nancy Kariuki, who just reiterates and just says that all is well here in Mombasa County. But just to keep you informed that they managed to receive the ballot papers early this morning after they were transported by the postal courier services to be deployed here in Mombasa County. And behind me is just opening of the boxes. It's just set for the exercise that is set for tomorrow. And we do know that Mombasa is a NASA stronghold, and most of the residents just, of course, waiting to hear from the NASA presidential candidate, Raila Odinga, who is set to speak later on this afternoon, just to give them way forward on whether or not they will or will not participate in this repeat exercise for the 26th that is set for tomorrow. But also it will be important to note that Mombasa residents have been some of the residents that did participate in the NASA demonstrations, the weekly demonstrations that were set for Monday to Friday. And of course there was no looting, of course, reported here in Mombasa County and the neighboring county in Kilifi County, where we do understand that they also have received their ballot material. So and we're just standing by here, hopefully just waiting for the ballot papers to be opened. We are told that that exercise is set to start later this afternoon, but all is set here, and they're just waiting for green lights to see whether or not the exercise will take place tomorrow or not.
All right, thank you very much, Saida. We'll be catching up with you shortly. Let's cross over now to Eldoret, where John Wanyama is standing by for us. Good morning, John. What can you tell us in as far as preparations for tomorrow's repeat presidential election? Have all ballot materials arrived, and what's the mood of area residents?
A very good morning to you, Anne, and here in Uasin Gishu County. Clearly, as you can see behind me, everything is set for this big day that Kenyans are waiting for tomorrow, and we don't know whether it's going to happen. But here in Uasin Gishu County, everyone is really willing and hoping that this day will come and go. As you can see, IEBC have already been prepared. They are just waiting for ballot papers to come in so that they can be transported to various places where they're supposed to go. And something of interest here is that the rain that is here is raining day and night, a very heavy rain. Maybe this one will be also a factor that can hinder this transportation of these materials to specific polling stations where they are supposed to go, because rains are very heavy here, and where they are going is very interior, and poor road network, it can also maybe delay this material. But IEBC officials had assured us earlier that they are going to do whatever they can so that they can transport these materials as early as possible, so that they avoid delay. And people here are really willing and waiting for this day. We don't know whether people are just confused waiting whether this day is coming, where this poll elections will happening. But here in Uasin Gishu, as earlier I said, informed to you, is that people are ready for this election. Maybe a question that people are asking is whether there will be vote apathy, or there will be a large number that will be turning out to come and vote during this day. And if maybe I can just talk to a member of parliament here from Soi to tell us maybe how prepared are you, Mheshimiwa, from Soi, and are we voting really?
Oh, we are very prepared, and we are going to vote, and the voter turnout is going to be larger than ever, because this is a special election for us, the people of Rift Valley, the people of Kenya, serious supporters of Jubilee and our President Uhuru Kenyatta and his Deputy William Ruto. We are ready for this election. We have heard you mention that there is a lot of rain. Yes, come rain, come shine, we are going to vote. We are ready. We are good to go.
So many cases in court, and today the Supreme Court is on test again today. Do you think this one maybe can stop this?
Well, I don't want to preempt what the Supreme Court is going to rule, but my gut feeling tells me this time they are going to think about Kenya, and they are going to rule that the election should proceed. And I think we are ready as Kenya. And we also urge them to, whatever ruling they are going to give, let them give it, and put Kenya first.
Thank you very much. And those are few just sentiments from an MP here. But what I can assure you, Anne, is that Uasin Gishu County is set. After a long wait, and with people being anxious to see what will happen, and after business are collapsing in this region, residents are having hope that this election is coming and it will go, so that they can be left alone. They continue with their businesses as usual. Anne.
All right, thank you, Wanyama, for that report. We'll catch up a little later. Let's get one more location for you this morning. We're live in Migori as well, where our Stephen Leto is standing by for us. Stephen, this is one of the areas where there is expected to be a significant challenge for IEBC to launch the election, owing to its significant support of the NASA presidential candidate. Are there concerns that IEBC will be able to kick off with an election when polls open tomorrow morning?
Well, a very good morning to you, Ann Kiguta. We are live from Migori County, one of the National Super Alliance Strongbeds, where they have been intensifying their campaigns that there should not be an election to be held in this particular county. Already, we were expecting to start getting a dispatch of ballot papers, ballot boxes, but until this moment, we have not seen any indication that ballot papers and ballot boxes will be making their way here in the county of Migori. Already yesterday, until into the night, the demonstrations spilled into the night. We saw youth demonstrating here, blocking the roads until past 10 p.m. That, of course, is saying that they will not allow any vehicle that is suspicious of carrying ballot boxes will be allowed, to use this particular road. Remember, this road where we are right now, and is the road that links Kisii and the Isebania, that is the Kenya-Tanzania border in the Sirare area. But that, of course, there are section of the Kuria region where also they are supposed to take those ballot boxes, and they are supposed to use this particular road as the main one. But owing to blockage, then IEBC might be forced to use an alternative route, either by airlifting those ballot boxes to that region, or by using an alternative route that is not this one that youth have since barricaded. But of course, this is one of the areas that really blocked the training of the ROs and the POs for this particular repeat exercise. And remember also, and today is one of the days that the National Super Alliance principals had said that there will be demonstrations in their strongholds, and already we are now starting to see youth starting to gather here and there in several parts of where they are calling Bunge la Wananchi and some of the points, meet-up points here in Migori. But as for now, the town remains calm. Quick businesses going on, but what we understand is towards midday, this will not be the Migori town that you know. And we are keeping an eye, of course, like we told you earlier, is business, of course, will be interrupted. Since yesterday, we saw there were no really ballot, business is being opened. But of course, all the way, if you can see already, the roads are being barricaded by used pebbles of stones that are being mounted in every like in about 300 meters distance. You get a roadblock there, and that happens right from Rongo all the way to the Migori Kuria border. That exactly is the situation along this particular road. We are waiting. Of course, you know, today the ballot papers, ballot boxes, of course, Lillian, Anne, are supposed to be here. But of course, from what we are seeing is it is a situation of wait and see. And the youth here and the electorate here, who are majorly the National Super Alliance supporters, saying there will be no election that will be conducted in the entire Migori County, and of course in the entire constituencies in Migori County. Yesterday we saw members of parliament, governor for the area, that is called Zakaria Obado, accompanied by several other legislators, crisscrossing across several constituencies, selling the same message, saying that we are not going to allow any voting to take place here, and that is what we are going to see. But again, quickly, and Migori County is a cosmopolitan county, housing both the Luo community and the Kuria community in the same county. And the side of the Kuria land has had several Jubilee Party forays and inroads, and that we are expecting to see some ballot boxes get into that area. It is that exercise that we want to see how it will be achieved. And so for now, and I want to hand you back, but later on we will be able to give you the very latest details on how the poll preparations, or the poll boycott preparations as it were, will be going on here at the county of Migori. Already youth are gathering here, saying that they are not going to allow any election to take place, and that they are going to heed the National Super Alliance principal Raila Odinga's call that no reforms, no election, and that in Migori it is a NASA stronghold, and that what they are now seeing is awaiting a Supreme Court ruling that will be issued at around 10 a.m. by the Supreme Court judges regarding on whether Kenyans should proceed to the poll. According to the electorate here in Migori, they are saying the IEBC is not ready to deliver a free, fair and a credible poll on that is tomorrow in few hours. But of course that is subject to what we will hear from the Supreme Court. But the situation here in Migori and remains as that, and as I told you, and youth beginning to chant no reforms, no election. And towards midday, like I said earlier, and this will not be the Migori that you know, because all the roads will be barricaded and the traffic flow and the entire business here will be paralyzed as you take to the streets, led of course by their area leaders. And so for now on, I want to hand you back and leave you probably later on with images from Migori County and how things are continuing to build up here.
All right, thank you, Stephen. We'll be watching developments from Migori and, of course, other NASA strongholds where you can expect similar sentiments. We should be able to take you now to the Supreme Court, where Francis Gashuri is standing by, and he'll be covering those proceedings for us live. So good morning, Francis. There are many cases that are before the courts, but this one in particular that has been filed by 3 activists yesterday, arguing that the prevailing environment in the country cannot guarantee a credible election, is perhaps the one that most Kenyans are watching very keenly, because it may have a direct impact as to whether or not this poll will be held. What more can you tell us about the details of this case and who filed it? Okay, Francis, I see you are having a challenge hearing me. I'm just going to repeat my question to you. If you can hear me now, give us details on this case that has been filed by 3 activists. Okay, Nikelele Nyingi, we've heard you. All right, we're going to sort that out with Francis Kashuri very shortly, who seems to be able to hear me. Okay, Francis, third time, 3 times a charm. What can you tell us about this petition by 3 activists seeking to have tomorrow's election stopped owing to the prevailing environment in the country?
Anki Guta, good morning. A lot of noise behind the scenes, Uko. But clearly I can now hear you. And a very good morning to you, coming live to you from the Supreme Court. And we're just counting minutes to the sitting that has been convened by the apex court in the land to hear a matter, a petition that has been filed by 3 voters, that is Samuel Mohochi, Helef Halifa, and Gashehe. They're seeking to stop tomorrow's presidential election, the repeat presidential election. And the grounds that they are raising are specific. That number 1, there is no right environment. The political environment is not conducive to conduct a free, fair and credible repeat presidential election as ordered by the Supreme Court on the 1st of September, that is last month. And secondly, the petitioners are raising questions on matters of law. Number 1, that the withdrawal of NASA leader Raila Odinga from the race, as it was, should have necessitated the cancellation of the entire process and a repeat exercise in terms of the fresh nomination. And thirdly, the petitioners are arguing that IEBC misread and misinterpreted the law when they failed to conduct fresh nominations for the candidates who are going to participate in the repeat presidential election, because the Supreme Court ordered a fresh election. So the petitioners, through their lawyers Harun Dubi and Dr. John Haminwa, are arguing that the IEBC team should have conducted fresh nominations to facilitate the conducting of the fresh presidential election. So that's what we are waiting for. And the various parties, the presidential candidates as well as IEBC, had been instructed by the deputy registrar of the Supreme Court yesterday in a communication from the Chief Justice to file their responses to the petitioners' lawyers by 8:30 a.m. this morning. I've just been speaking to Harun Dubi, one of the lawyers representing the petitioners, and he's telling me that the presidential candidates as well as IEBC team have sent the responses to him via mail, so he was working around to prepare the documents and print them so that they can be able to go to court at 10 a.m. But a short while ago, I also saw Chief Justice David Maraga arriving at the Supreme Court, so we can say the man of the moment once again is within the court's precincts, and all that we are waiting for is 10 a.m. to get here so that lawyers representing the various parties can appear so that the matter can be argued substantively. And remember, this is the matter, or the orders that will be coming from the court today will, as it were, tell us whether the country will be proceeding to the repeat presidential election tomorrow or not.
Right, Gashuri, we're going to let you go, but we do, of course, understand that there are other cases that will be before various courts, and I wonder what you know about them. At the High Court, we're expecting Justice Muta to be issuing 2 rulings, one involving the former Kilomo MP who wants and another by Uzalende Institute, who want IEBC to be compelled to, push this election owing to the issue of fresh nominations. We also know that there are other cases such as that by Kandara MP Ali Swahome and businessman Raju Bhagat Singh, both wanting NASA to be stopped from a poll boycott as well as holding demonstration on Thursday. What perspective can you give us on the impact of all of these court cases which are seeking different things on tomorrow's possible presidential election?
And the number of cases relating to this repeat presidential election, especially at the High Court, is simply dizzying. There are very many and raising various issues. But looking at what happened yesterday, the judges of the High Court dismissed 2 very important cases that had been filed, 2 petitions. One by Okia Omtata seeking the establishment of a caretaker government, and the other one by Pokot South MP David Kosing seeking to compel NASA leader Raila Odinga to participate in the repeat presidential election, bearing in mind that he was a successful petitioner in the invalidated presidential election. And those 2 cases were dismissed on similar grounds, that the High Court did not have jurisdiction to hear those matters, and that the matter should be presented to the Supreme Court for determination. And when you look at some of the issues that have been raised in the cases that are pending, that are meant to be made a determination on today, the issues that have been raised at the High Court are similar almost similar to the issues that have been raised by the three petitioners here at the Supreme Court. So I assume, or I want to look at what happened yesterday and relate it to today. Those two cases are likely to be dismissed yet again on the question of jurisdiction, and that the petitioners will still be asked to come to the Supreme Court. A short while ago, I've spotted Okia Omtata here holding some huge files, and he told me that he's coming to file the petition that was dismissed by the High Court for lack of jurisdiction. He's coming to the Supreme Court to file it, and he was proceeding to the registry of the Supreme Court to file those documents. So in equal measure, you can expect that those two matters, especially the Haron Moore case and as well as the other two petitions that are relating to the conduct of the repeat presidential election tomorrow, are also likely to be dismissed using the same grounds that were used yesterday, and that the petitioners will be asked to proceed to the Supreme Court if they are still interested in pursuing that matter and file the matter there, because the High Court judges Chacha Mwita yesterday and John Mativo were saying they lack jurisdiction to hear a matter that is actively before the Supreme Court. And because the prayers and the grounds that have been raised by the petitioners at the High Court are almost similar to the issues that have been raised at the Supreme Court, so most likely they will be referred to the Supreme Court to argue their matter there. So you can expect also, other than the petition that has been filed by the three gentlemen, you can expect that there will probably be a few more petitions that will be raised relating to the same matter, the repeat presidential election tomorrow. And
yeah, and that's an interesting point you raise, Francis, on the jurisdictional issues of the High Court and what happened yesterday. But in your own coverage of these things, I wonder what may be your perspective in terms of whether or not the courts are also in themselves feeling that they are being abused in a roundabout way. I think in the last 2 or so weeks we've heard from various sections, various legal minds saying that whereas we all have a right to go to court on these matters, but in this particular election cycle it appears that the excessive amount of cases that have been used almost appear to become an abuse of the legal system. What's your perspective on that?
Everybody has a right to seek interpretation and arbitration from the court of law, especially when there is a dispute on matters of law and when there seems to be some ambiguity in terms of interpretation of the law. And so when the judges of the High Court say they lack jurisdiction and refer all these people to the Supreme Court, then definitely the Supreme Court is the place to be. And of importance, Anne, is the petition that has been filed by Muhochi, Halifa and Gashehe, because the issues that they have raised are similar in nature in terms of the grounds and the prayers that have been sought by the other petitioners at the High Court. So the determination that the judges of the Supreme Court are going to make today will, as it were, bind all the other petitioners in the lower courts. And the focus, probably the focus of the country today, will be here at the Supreme Court. And there could also be quite some intrigues, and we must bear in mind that there are quite a number of issues that are likely to arise. For example, when IEBC responds to the petition that was filed yesterday, how will the response be? Will the commissioners file a separate response from what the chairperson of the commission will be filing? That is a matter that we need to keep an eye on, and a very close eye on. There's a possibility that the chairman of the commission could file a separate application either in support of the petition or thereof, and the commissioners could also file a separate petition. And quite a number of intrigues likely to happen in the court today, but eventually the judges of the Supreme Court will give us a ruling with finality on whether tomorrow Kenyans can proceed to court or not. And the whole question of whether they will be asking the country to proceed on elections, and if there are any issues that will come up insofar as discrepancies or illegalities or irregularities, that any aggrieved person can still come back to the Supreme Court and file a petition contesting the outcome of the election. They could also say that the petitioners have raised serious matters of law and maybe determine that they will want to extend or postpone the election and extend the day to a later date. So those are the two likely answers that we are going to get from the Supreme Court today. Whether we will be proceeding to an election tomorrow as a country, or whether the grounds that have been raised by the petitioners are solid enough to warrant postponement of that election tomorrow. Anne.
Gashuri, I'm letting you go with this last question. You did tell us that you've seen the CJ within the precincts of the Supreme Court. I'm wondering what you know about the nature of the bench that will sit. Can we expect the full bench to be seated? And in particular, I'm thinking of the DCJ, Philomena Mwilu, whose bodyguard was shot yesterday. Do you have any knowledge as to whether she will be sitting today with the entire bench?
Obviously, the attack on the DCJ's bodyguard yesterday was very serious news that even warranted the top police officer in the country, that is the Inspector General of Police, Joseph Boynet, as well as the Minister in charge of Interior Affairs, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, to proceed to Nairobi Women's Hospital, where the bodyguard is admitted. It's a very serious matter, bearing in mind that it came on the eve of a very serious determination that the Deputy Chief Justice is expected to be part of, insofar as the question of whether we'll be proceeding to the election tomorrow or not. So all eyes will be around there to see whether the DCJ will be making her way to the bench today to hear this matter. But remember, quorum is 5, and so you will expect that for the bench to be fully constituted to hear this matter, because it's a very serious matter, then you will expect that the at least five of the 7 judges of the Supreme Court will be expected to sit and hear this matter. And we still don't know whether Judge Mohammed Ibrahim has recovered. Remember, he was absent during the a large part of the presidential election petition last month, and so we will be keeping an eye and see whether all the judges, the 7 judges, will be making their way here, and whether the DCJ will be present, and more so also whether Justice Mohammed Ibrahim will have recovered to return to the bench to hear this matter. But remember, quorum is 5 for this kind of a situation, and should there be lack of those 5 judges at least, then that will also raise other technical issues. But let's see how the situation turns. Around here is the city clock, and it tells me it's about 27 minutes to the hour, and so definitely we'll keep an eye and see whether all the judges will be present during that sitting this afternoon. And by the way, let me tell you where I am outside the Supreme Court. It's a no-go zone, basically, for people who have no business around here at the Supreme Court. Only lawyers representing various parties in this matter, judiciary staff, and members of the media are allowed, as long as they have the right accreditation and badges. So it's a no-go zone for members of the public. The City Hall Way, as well as Wabera Street, remain barricaded for now. And our cameraman Ken can show you that the same barricades that were here during the Supreme Court presidential election petition last month are here, and no one is allowed to access around here unless you have business to do with the matter at hand. That is the petition that has been filed by the 3 petitioners, Mohochi, Halifa, and Gashehe. Anne. All
right, Francis, thanks so much for your report. We'll catch up with you a little later. Perhaps let's take one more link as we take a look at the situation across the country and take you now to Nyeri, where Martin Munene is standing by for us. Good morning, Martin. What can you tell us about preparations by IEBC to launch tomorrow's repeat presidential poll?
A very good morning to you, Anne, from Nyeri County. And like you said, we are in Nyeri County, and where I'm standing is at the Nyeri National Polytechnic, where preparations are still ongoing. Behind me, actually, you can see, I think you can see ballot boxes and every other equipment that is required for this particular election. Election officials are actually putting the final touches to ensure that every single thing that is required to ensure that we have an election tomorrow is being taken care of. We can see that the presidential ballot boxes are already marked. Every single one of them is marked. For example, here we have 2, for example, one for Kwanderi Primary School in one constituency. We have another one for the YMCA in Orengo, that is in another constituency. And what is happening here right now is that in this hall, they're ensuring that the ballot boxes are okay and they're labeled and clearly marked, and also every other thing that they need that is needed for the conduction of the the election is taken care of. We can see standby lamps in case electricity. On this other side, we can see standby lamps in case electricity goes off in the various polling stations. We can also see the forms that are required to be filled in envelopes. We can see them also with officials taking care of them and making sure that every single form that is required has been taken care of. And outside this hall, also a number of activities is taking place. We can see that we have actually seen officials, that is deputy presiding officers and presiding officers, getting their letters of appointments and signing the necessary documents so that they can be able to actually conduct the election.
All right, we apologize for that freeze on the image from Nyeri, but we had our Martin Munene reporting. We're going to return to him as soon as we can. But let me now introduce my panel to you this morning, and I'll begin at the furthest end of our bar, if you like, and we have Priscilla Nyokabi, who is a lawyer and former women rep. Next to her is Mark Bichachi, who's a communication strategist. Next to Mark is Charles Kipkule, a political analyst, and right next to me is Dr. Alutalala Mukwana, who is an advocate. And I want to thank you all for coming. Priscilla, let me start with you by giving us context, even as we keep our eyes on the Supreme Court with just a couple of minutes, about 15 or so before the court should be in session. So, Priscilla, as you've heard from our earlier report in our conversation with Francis, there are various cases that are before the courts in one way or another, one at the Supreme Court, about two or so in lower courts. Is the Supreme Court case, the one filed by these three activists talking about the political environment in the country, the most significant hurdle to tomorrow's presidential election? Obviously, they cite other issues as to why they want that election put off. Or do you think that the cases that are also in the lower courts, one by Alice Wahome, talking about NASA being compelled to stop the poll boycott and demonstrations, as well as another that is by Harun Mao that is seeking fresh nominations, could equally significantly impact tomorrow's possible presidential poll?
I'm personally hoping that none of the cases is going to impact tomorrow's poll, none of them at all. We've been in this position. I have personally before held an election of the NGO Council, similar tussles and everybody not wanting to go to the election. There was a 60-day period between when it was ordered that we go to the election. In 60 days, it's really telling that you come on the 59th. You didn't come on the 3rd day or on the 4th day or on the 20th day. And in the case where we were before Justice Mwera then, I loved his advice to all of us, go and have the election, the courts don't move. If there is any injustice in that election, you will come back here and we will hear you. And if there is any injustice at all in the election process, that's going to be resolved by these courts. I'm hoping that today the judges live by that jurisprudence. Go to the election tomorrow. It is prepared election. 12 billion shillings have been spent. The economy is struggling. Everybody is struggling. Our anxieties are high. Let us go to this election. Pray if there is any injustice, courts don't move. The Supreme Court is going to be there tomorrow. The Supreme Court will be there next week. Some of these cases don't even have to be resolved now. Some of them are long-term cases. The two that are going to be most impactful are the one by the three petitioners, the one by Gasheke and Mohochi and Helif, and the one by Harun Mao on fresh nominations. The fresh nominations matter is one caused by the fact that we've never been here before. This is the first time that the Supreme Court has annulled a presidential election. So in terms of development of law, you do find that you have gaps. I think that IBC, I also personally held the view from the beginning that IBC should have held fresh nominations. They were confused by the jurisprudence, or sort of, it wasn't very clear from the jurisprudence of 2013. And you know, they should have interpreted that correctly, because in 2013 that was not a question. In 2013 that was obiter dicta by the court. So from the beginning I personally held the view that IBC should have called a fresh nomination, because that is the way in which presidential candidates signify their preparation for participation in the next election. And because of Article 138(1), that if you have only one presidential candidate nominated, then if the others don't come in for the nomination, you can declare that one validly elected. But you know, seeing where we are at, that's an area of law that should develop some more. That's a question that we probably need to determine on a different day. There are aspects of provisions that we now read on fresh nomination, that even where it is not conducted, there is the rule that you then remove yourself from an election within 3 days of the Gazette notice. But my point remains what I told you earlier, that the judges of this country should send everybody to the election tomorrow, and after the election, if there is any problem with that election, then we will all be left, the courts will continue to do the work that they need to do. The other one is just to remind the courts that Article 38, which is the right to vote, is one of only 2 rights that are reserved for citizens. All of our other rights are every person. The right to demonstrate is every person. The right to movement is every person. The right to food, the right to anything is every person. It is only the political rights, the right to choose the leader of your country. That's the only right that is reserved to citizens of this country, to Kenyan citizens. So 19 million citizens registered as voters, 15 million who turned out in the August vote. I think that we should be allowed a chance to exercise this right. If you look at democracies world over, this right to vote is one of the most hallowed rights of citizens anywhere. And in Kenya here, we had the debate of whether to pick our chief executive officer, who is the president, through the parliamentary system or through the direct vote. And Kenyans across the country, from Bungoma, Mayon County of Nyeri, Muranga, you can look at the evidence of the CKRC reports. Every place that the CKRC went, they wanted to directly vote for the president. All Kenyans want to directly vote for the president. We still want to directly vote for the president. We must be allowed to do that tomorrow.
All right, let me just get another comment from Advocate Dr. Lutalala Muhana, your own thoughts in terms of all these cases that are before the courts. Which do you think would be most impactful? Whose decision would be most impactful on tomorrow's repeat presidential election? And whilst I say that, let me just bring you up to speed. We understand that the case by Kandara MP Ali Swahome and businessman Raju Bhagat Singh is shortly underway, and we'll be taking you live to get that case. They both want enough a stop from calling for a poll boycott as well as holding demonstrations tomorrow. So we'll be live with that shortly. But before we get there, Dr. Mukwana.
Thank you very much, Anne. First of all, I always say that when you pose these kinds of questions, it's good to contextualize what brings us to that point, so that even as we develop arguments from that, it makes sense to our viewers.
If you can do it briefly.
The 2 cases, and Francis Gashuri is right in his analysis, the 2 cases that are waiting to be heard at the High Court, chances are that they will not proceed. They will be asked to go to the right forum, which is the Supreme Court. And the reason is that although the issues that they frame seem to be constitutional, the substratum of those issues hinge on the presidential election. And the right forum for presidential election arbitration or dispute is the Supreme Court and not the High Court. So I agree with Francis Gashuri's analysis on that one. The 2 cases, in my view, that might impact on tomorrow's election, depending on how they go, because I'm not going to the merits and demerits of the case at the moment.
Argue the cases here.
Yes, is the case, the most recent one by Khalifa and company and group, and the one for Harun Mao. I see the one for Harun Mao not being very instrumental, in the sense that what he's asking for, as my sister on the other side has said, is saying that, look, we ought to have gone for fresh nominations.
Right.
Indeed, there were mistakes by IBC right from the start, when they misread the law and said, let's have only 2, and then later on they added several others. So in my view, Harun's case may not have a huge impact.
Okay.
What stands to have a huge impact is this case before the Supreme Court. And the reason why I pose so is because, and that's what I said about contextualizing, is what are the issues that they're bringing before the Supreme Court. The opposing citizens have been told, you ought to have gone back to court and said, what you ordered is not being done. But see, they could not have done that, because once the court issued those orders, they became factors official, meaning their role and authority in that matter ended with the decision they delivered. What these 3 citizens have done is actually to come to the same Supreme Court and say, look, we are citizens, we are voters, and the orders that you gave have not been complied with. And therefore we fear that if we proceed to have these elections, our rights to a free, fair and credible election will be fundamentally hurt and injured. So in my view, that's a very strong case, because it's not in dispute that IBC has not complied fully with the orders of the court. Apart from the 26th election, all else are in huge dispute. So whether the Supreme Court will find it in order that on the basis of those arguments, the election ought to be stopped, or if they find that on the basis of those arguments, although they hold water, they can wait until after the election, that is a decision that we can only leave to the Supreme Court. We cannot speculate.
Right.
But in my view, they're very strong grounds.
Okay. I think for the benefit of my audience, let me just mention the other issues that they are raising. One being the fact that they want the court to interpret what the withdrawal of Raila Odinga from the election means. They argue that having Odinga pull out from the race means that the new poll date should be vacated. They say that the election should therefore be interpreted as cancelled. And, you know, let me now open it up to the rest of my panel, Mark and Charles. Like Priscilla said, if there's one thing that this entire debacle, if you like, has presented, has been the gaps in law, the gaps in the Constitution. We do not seem to have a full understanding of, you know, the implication of various actions, including this one of Mr. Odinga's pullout from the race on the election. Can Kenyans walk away with a bit of a, I mean, it is exhausting on one level, but can we be encouraged by the fact that maybe jurisprudence is being built, that this is a critical time in the country, you know, where we're actually shaping the future of the republic, or is it for some of you an abuse of the court process?
Thank you, Anne. What I think about this is that this is one of the most extraordinary elections that we are holding as our country, and it's because of the affinity to litigation that has characterized the election. And so going forward, it is only natural that we've had a lot of cases before the courts, and going forward, opinions are divided. One side of the country feels that the courts are the only last port of call when there are issues to be addressed, but there is also another section of the country which feels that the courts are being misused. So it all has to do with the question of perception, because elections majorly are issues of the political processes, and therefore the lenses with which almost every Kenyan perceives even court processes that affect elections is first of all the political lens. But on the flip side of which, I agree that it is helping to build the body of jurisprudence around our elections, because they come from a time where there was really no, we have a history where elections were done, but the courts were not strong enough to pronounce themselves on such issues. So going forward, it is good that the courts have been given an opportunity to arbitrate on such matters, but they should also know that, as per the dictum in law, that not only must justice be done, it must be seen to be done. So when they're rendering their judgments, they need to remain cognizant to the fact that Kenyans are viewing these processes mainly through their political lenses, and there is the issue of managing the perceptions and the perceptions of bias in this case.
Let me put you a direct question, because we are getting some news just in that the High Court has, in the case of Kandara MP Ali Swahome and businessman Raju Bhagat Singh, declined to issue orders to stop demonstrations tomorrow. Your thoughts on that?
You know, one of the critical things that we need to understand as a country is we keep thinking that somehow if we litigate more and if we go to court more, we will heal the maladies that affect the body that is called Kenya. We are like a traditional healer trying to cure the headache and the fever and not dealing with the malaria. So yes, we have a headache. The headache is, should we have elections or not? Yes, we have a headache. Should there be demonstrations or not? But the real disease that we are not dealing with, and that's what we are really seeking for, is we as a nation cannot agree on what is good for this nation. You see, when you find what is good, then to find the law that accommodates what is good is easy. But when we're in a position where we cannot determine for 45 million Kenyans what process is actually good for the country, what is actually true for the country, what is the higher good of the country, we will be in courts forever. And the problem is, Maraga cannot issue an order saying, love your neighbor. And that's the problem. He cannot issue a statement saying, if your neighbor wants to go and vote, don't stone him. He cannot issue a dictate that says, when you go to vote tomorrow, how democracy works is you've got to respect the outcome of that poll. And the real disease is not constitutional. It is not legal. We live in a country where even justice is perceived from where you come from. I sat somewhere over the weekend where I saw people clapping when border borders were being beaten. And I sat somewhere else where people were crying for the same incident in the same country. What that tells you is the real constitutional place we need to go to is the place where we ask ourselves as a nation, where do we want to go to and what is good for us? If we can answer that question, then we have answers for what the judges should rule like, how the election should be, how we should divide positions and things like that. But for as long as we don't answer the underlying issue of how we feel as a nation and how we feel about each other, we will go to court forever trying to stop and have an election in the same court.
I mean, and I hear you, Mark. I think it's been said, and it is only the one who does not want to hear who will not hear that. Everybody knows this is bigger than this particular election, but the election is the immediate matter before us, if you get what I'm saying. And I think a lot of people have talked about the fact that we need to address these issues immediately after this election, that it's high time for a national conversation. Kepsa said the same. We're standing by to try and get you a picture from Westlands, where Catholic bishops are expected to be giving their final position on tomorrow's repeat presidential poll. We do understand that there have been some significant high-level meetings between religious leaders, crisis meetings between religious leaders who largely had held that there should have been some sort of mediation, some sort of talks between President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga before this poll. That has not happened, both protagonists making it very clear that they're not interested in the same before the poll. And so we'll wait and see what the position of Catholic bishops will be on the same. We're also expecting this morning for you a statement from the Africa Union regarding the presidential repeat election. We're going to give you pictures from the Supreme Court, which should in about 5 minutes or so be getting down to business, and so those images will be up for you quickly. But Alice, if I could get your response on what the court has said in the Kandara MP's petition. They have refused to stop tomorrow's protest, and you can understand, I suppose, the dilemma of a court not wanting to be seen perhaps in any way engaging in the politics of the issue, but letting it, things go as they will. What will the impact of nationwide demonstrations be to a poll which the same courts ordered should be held in accordance with the law?
I'm not too happy about that decision of the court not to grant the orders stopping the demonstrations tomorrow, because with an election going on, there's a sense of order and stability that you want. You have almost two rights on the same day. You have the right to vote on one hand, and you have people who want to demonstrate on the other. I think the courts should have restricted the demonstrators tomorrow, and they can demonstrate on any other day. Alternatively, what courts can do is give distance, and I hope the police are going to do that, and say 1 kilometer to every polling station, there's not going to be any demonstration. So that those who want to go to the polling station can then go to the polling station, and it's very clear that the two groups, those going to polling stations and those going to the demonstrations, don't collide. But I keep saying that our democracy is growing. I think that this 12th Parliament needs to really spend some time on this right of demonstration and to give rules and limits. It is true that in the country we need to love each other, but the only way 42 or 44 tribes or 74 tribes coexist in this country is using the rules that they have passed, and one of those is the Constitution. We all now are at a time when, for our stability, for our continued existence together, we must respect this Constitution, and one way is going to the election tomorrow and then addressing the many issues that there are in this country.
All right, and you can see NASA's Senior Counsel James Orengo on the screens adjacent to us has made his way to the Supreme Court for the hearing of this key election challenge. Dr. Lutalala, we're just counting down the clock. Your thoughts again on the Alice Wahome case? You've heard Priscilla's argument. Is it going to be important for a lot of clarity from the police or from and possibly IEBC in terms of demarcating, which areas must be secured for the process of the election and the distance that protesters can keep in order to have a poll tomorrow?
Thank you. I think to begin with, the very prayers by Alice Wahome were faulty from the onset, because what Alice was asking the court to do was to deny fellow citizens a right that the Constitution grants. And the same constitution again safeguards Alice Wahome's rights. So there is no way the court was going to say that all the demos must stop. That was going to be unconstitutional. What the court has done is in order. What Alice is alluding to ought to be purely administrative on the part of the security agencies, such that tomorrow we have two important activities taking place. There is the election that is going to take place, and there is the picketing and demonstration. So yes, to that extent, if that be purely an administrative arrangement by the police, then that is understood. Because we do not want to have a situation where there is a collision among the citizens, and therefore leading to lack of peace and safety for the citizens. But as far as the Alice Wahome's prayer is concerned, I think the court has served its justice. You cannot plead to court that demonstrations and picketing, which is enshrined within the Constitution, be banned. What you can ask is that those demonstrations and picketing be done within the confines of the law.
Okay, fair point. I wanted to take us now live to Waumini House, where Catholic bishops are issuing their statement, their final position on tomorrow's presidential poll.
As your shepherds, we want to see a transition towards proper democratic governance. We have therefore appealed to President Uhuru and Honorable Raila to put first the interest of the country before their own ardent positions. We still believe that it is not too late for the two leaders to appeal to the country and their supporters, either jointly or individually, to salvage the beloved country Kenya from the political standoff and assure the nation that those who wish to vote should be allowed to vote peacefully, and those who do not wish to vote should peacefully stay away from the voting exercise. We as religious leaders are calling upon the government and the citizens of Kenya to ensure that right to life is protected and guaranteed in the Constitution of Kenya, Article 26, paragraph 1 and 2 and 3, which states every person has the right to life from the moment of conception to natural death. Nobody should take any person's life arbitrarily or intentionally, because life is sacred and is God-given. In keeping with the Constitution, we encourage, as we did earlier, that those aggrieved to use the legal means and provide a mechanism to seek redress. We specifically appeal that the demonstrations be called for on the 26th of October be called off. We appeal to His Excellency the President and Right Honorable Raila Odinga to truly and sincerely look for means and avenues that bring this election process and cycle to a closure, so that we may move forward together into the election period, to the post-election period. We have numerous and deep socio-economic issues that need to be urgently addressed. Dear Kenyans and the people of goodwill, we appeal to each and every one of you to respect one another and to uphold peace at these moments. Moreover, let us allow those who wish to vote peacefully and willingly, and those who wish to abstain from voting to stay away from the polling stations, and their democratic rights should be also respected. Further, we appeal to you that we should not allow ourselves to be provoked and indulge in activities that do not promote peace and national cohesion. Let us also respect our brothers and sisters, and especially of IEBC, especially now they carry out their responsibility of conducting the elections under the prevailing circumstances. We should be our brother's keeper.
Finally, let us be aware that God will judge all of us, both leaders and citizens on our actions. We, the Catholic bishops, and as your shepherds, shall continue to humbly play our prophetic role with commitment and courage. Above all, we continue to offer prayers for all citizens and for our country. Kenyans, we are in a very difficult moment, and yet we must rise above the ethnic and political drums of conflict. Let us embrace dialogue in all our undertaking, including political responsibilities, to steer the country forward. Once more, we urge all citizens to join us to intensely pray for our country. God is with us and will see us through. This document was signed by Bishop Philip Anyolo, the chairman of the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops, and also signed by Bishop John Obala Owa, the Vice Chairman, Bishop of Ngong, His Eminence John Cardinal Njue, the Archbishop of Nairobi, Most Reverend Secretary of Court, the Archbishop of Kisumu, Most Reverend Martin Kivuva Musonde, the Archbishop of Mombasa, Most Reverend Anthony Muheria, the Archbishop of Nyeri and Apostolic Administrator of Kitui and Machakos, Right Reverend Bishop Cornelius Korir of Eldoret, Right Reverend Joseph Mairura Okemwa of Kisii, Right Reverend Maurice Crowley of Kitale, and Right Reverend Alfred Rotich of KCCB, Right Reverend Norman Kingo Wambua of Bungoma, and Right Reverend Peter Kihara of Marsabit, Right Reverend David Kamau Nganga.
All right, and there you have it. Catholic bishops asking NASA to drop their protests tomorrow, being the most significant thing they've said. That was coming to you live from Wamini House. Let's take you to the Supreme Court, which should have already began its sittings. We're going to show you inside the courts and outside. As you can see, there are at the top of your screen inside the courts the bar, as it were, ready, and they are awaiting, of course, the bench to take its place. But at the bottom, you can see women in white. Those are a group called Wamama Wamama na Katiba. They are there holding their own protests, asking the court to allow them to exercise their right to vote. So those are the protesters that you're seeing on your screen right now. Perhaps you can get that image also in full for you very shortly. At the bottom, you're seeing ladies in white. They are called Wamama na Katiba. They are protesting outside this court. There you are, peacefully asking the court to respect their right to vote. This, of course, ahead of a key sitting of the court, as 3 activists moved to the Supreme Court yesterday, arguing that the prevailing environment in the country cannot guarantee a credible election. This, of course, is an incredibly important case. It could be one that may lead to a postponement of tomorrow's fresh presidential election. And so there you can see them just taking a lap, if you like, around those areas surrounding the Supreme Court. Remember, this is also an area that has largely been cordoned off to the public. This precinct is being treated with a significant amount of security on the back of various issues. The fact that we're expecting protests to resume today, NASA protests to resume today, some which have unfortunately taken a violent tone. And of course there was the shooting incident of the bodyguard for the Deputy Chief Justice, perhaps that equally informing the added security that we've seen at the Supreme Court today. So we're waiting for that. We're also keeping our eyes at the lower courts. We've seen the dispensation of at least one matter, the Alice Wahome case. We are also expecting another case, that of Harun Mwau, who is the former Kilome MP, and another by the Uzalendo Institute. That a little later in the day at 3 p.m. But at the High Court, Justice Muita will be issuing 2 rulings in these 2 cases. The first of Mwau, that is seeking to have a fresh nomination in order for a repeat presidential election to be carried out. That too could impact the case, tomorrow's presidential election. And then there is equally the one filed by Kiambu MP Jude Njomo, who is compelling IEBC to hold that election. We understand that we have very shortly for you the President's response to the case that has been filed by the 3 petitioners at the Supreme Court. We did understand earlier, Mark, that equally a response by IEBC had been filed and that lawyers were perusing through the same. But when Gashuri was reporting, he raised something quite interesting, that there could even be the possibility of separate responses by a commission that has appeared divided. Your thoughts on that?
One of the things that is becoming very clear about the IEBC, and if you look at the communication and how they're giving out their communication, there seems to be 2 commissions. A commission that is imagined and held within Chebukati's mind, and the other commissioners put together doing what they think is best. Now, the biggest mistake with the IEBC right now is with the exit of Akombe, they do not have a spokesperson. Why? Because when Chebukati comes on TV and he comes to the media, his body language alone tells you that this is someone who's telling the country that I am defeated, that I am weak, that I have no strength. And the problem of doing that, you know, one of the things that I think we need to teach the men of this country, when your wife comes home crying that thugs are coming out, please do not cry with her. Stand up firm and go to the door and say, where is this thug? What Chebukati is doing is he's crying with the rest of us. He has all the power, but he's crying with the rest of us about the election. What Chebukati needs to do is he needs to get firm, and he needs to get firm quickly, and he needs to get firm in 2 positions. He needs to get firm concerning the entire commission, and he needs to show them that he's in charge, and he needs to get firm in terms of how he's handling the politicians and this particular election, because his statement was worrying. He has the material capacity and the HR capacity to hold an election to a masterclass level. He's able to do that. But what is the problem? The problem is, he says, but the politician is pressuring me. This is like a referee saying, I cannot referee the match because the captains are being unruly. But that is the whole point. That's why you're the referee. That's why you're the returning officer. You need to call them to order. And if you do not do that, don't come and complain and say, I've been unable to do my job, please help me. Do your job. That's what needs to happen. But if they do give two statements to the Supreme Court, and we always need to look at what are we communicating to the nation when you do these things, because the question is, if you file two petitions, one petition saying stop, okay, one response rather saying stop the election, and the other one saying, you know what, let's continue, from the same commission, don't we know that a house divided against itself cannot stand?
And that's a fair point, but I just want to be clear so that we don't, in our belaboring it, we do not appear to suggest that that is what is the case. We do not know that that is the case. We were simply talking about scenarios. But what I can tell you for free, for my panel, and you can respond to this, is that we now have seen the affidavit that has been filed by President Uhuru Kenyatta, in which he argues that the three voters do not have admissible evidence that the elections will not be credible, and he argues that should the elections be cancelled, grievous harm would be inflicted on public interest. So that's just in terms of President Uhuru Kenyatta's response to this case by the activists that we are expecting to kick off at the Supreme Court shortly, saying that the voters do not have any evidence that the elections will not be credible in accordance with the law, and that grievous harm would be inflicted on public interest should tomorrow's election not proceed. Your thoughts on, there's been a lot of debate as to whether postponing this election would be good for the country or bad for the country, and I do not want us to argue the merits of the case, but your own thoughts in terms of the amount of money that has been spent on the one hand to get this election underway, the political temperature that is there, and also balancing the fact that a lot of people at the end of the day are worried. They're worried what is going to happen tomorrow. Those who want to vote are worried whether they'll be able to, access these polling stations and go back home to security. And on the other hand, you have the opposite view. How can the country reconcile itself with all these competing issues?
I think the tragedy with this, the situation we find ourselves, is that we have a law and we have a clear direction that we need to hold elections within 60 days. And we are still struggling with the question of whether or not we shall hold elections. So in my view, I think this holding an election tomorrow is actually a referendum on the constitutional order of our country. Because if we do not hold the election tomorrow, then we cannot guarantee that we shall hold it probably within the next 90 days, as is being pushed in some quarters. Because then what we are communicating out there to every law-abiding citizen is that we can tweak the law to suit our circumstances. So the biggest thing that we have to take care of right now is to preserve the constitutional order in our country. And the other important issue is that there is serious fatigue amongst the citizenry. Their livelihoods and just their ways of life have been affected to the core. They need to move on. Across the country, they need closure. And even if we need to have reforms and other issues that have to be attended to, then it does not mean that we need to stop the election so that we do it. We can do the elections, then we talk. But the election to me is very critical, because then that is the only assurance that we live in respect to the laws that we have made unto ourselves.
Dr. Talan.
Anne, I was wondering, when you were engaging Mark on the issue of two likely responses from the IBC, and I was wondering why. Because the petition is clear. The first respondent is the IBC and the chairman, and the second one is the IEBC. So in court, I do not know why we are even entertaining the thought that we are likely to have two responses for
I
IBC.
think perhaps it wasn't phrased correctly, but I'm saying, having two distinct positions, one very separate from the other.
Who from who?
The chairman arguing something very separate from what the commission says, because we've come from talking about a commission that is allegedly under siege, where the chairman feels that he has been isolated from the rest of the commissioners. The one stalwart that he had in his corner has resigned, therefore the distinction.
That cannot play out in court. It can only play out internally, where the instructing commissioners, because remember the commission is represented. if there's any difference in the arguments, we'll see them in terms of what the the advocates for the IBC will be arguing, and what the advocates for Chebukati, the chairperson, will be arguing. That is the point where we may see departure. But we cannot have two responses because it is specific. It is the chairman, and you only have one chairman now, and it is IBC. So I do not think it's right for us to entertain that thought for now. It's a bit dangerous. Two, you've asked a question about...
But you seem to be proving my point that there could be departure in their arguments.
The departure, yes.
Which is what we are discussing. A departure in the argument or in the position that the chairman may hold, and a departure in the argument that the lawyers for the commission may hold. And whether or not that departure will signal something more. That is what we are discussing.
Yeah, to that point, yes, you're right. My concern was the framing of saying there are two different responses, which was appearing from the face of it a bit not right. So I agree with you that there will be departures, but that can only be manifested in the arguments and responses that will be issued from the Chebukati's lawyers and the IBC lawyers, assuming that the IBC lawyers will not be taking instructions from Chebukati or from a common position. Now,
yes, I think we're on the same page. We're on the same page.
Yeah, thank you. Now, you have asked about the cost of this postponement.
Right.
You see, I have said, those of us who are arguing that this election must be held are right, because the argument is premised on the fact that the Supreme Court ordered so, and the Constitution under Article 140, under which the election was annulled, ordered so. But those who are saying it ought not to be held now are also right, because the order to hold elections 26th is just the last limb of the Maraga order. There was another order which required that this election must be held in compliance and in conformity with the law. Now, there was an order for the audits to be done by IBC. What the politicians have succeeded in doing, they have actually guided the national conversation to dwell on 26th. So what people are discussing now is, should we hold on 26th or should we not? Nobody is asking, is this 26th October election going to be in compliance with the orders and the law? And that is where we depart. So for me, if we have had an IBC which did it transparently and in compliance and involving all the stakeholders as required by the Elections Act, we will not be here. Or at least, even if we were here, the positions will not be as entrenched as they are now.
But IBC has said that they are, and I hear your point, especially your last part of the argument in terms of being fixated on a date as opposed to, meeting the standard of law, Daktari. But IBC has said that technically it is ready to comply with this order, but they were concerned about the prevailing environment. And then thereafter, we saw the chairman Sunday being quoted as saying that they were completely ready. But this affidavit, to speak to your point, that has been filed by the president, is talking about there is no admissible evidence, that these three have not presented any evidence to prove the point that you're making right now, the credibility of the election, that it's complying with the standard of law.
Let's not mix those two issues. When you say that the IBC has admitted that they are prepared, look, IBC now, the word from IBC right now counts for very little.
Okay.
It is the same IBC chairman who has told us that he is not able to guarantee us a free and fair election. That is what lack of credibility does to an institution. So any word coming from IBC now, to be frank with you, it counts for very little. Preparedness is not just a concept. It is like justice. It must not only be seen, but it must be seen to be done. The Election Act mandates IBC to involve the stakeholders in these preparations. Have the stakeholders been called and agreed that the audits that were ordered have been done? What is happening, and I've said it before, IEBC is playing to different voices, and that is the tragedy that we are in. If on Wednesday Chebukati tells us, ladies and gentlemen of Kenya, I cannot guarantee free and fair elections. On Sunday, he says, now I think, and I think Mark is right in describing his character. On Sunday now he tells us that I think systems are in place, we can carry on. Believe you me, Chebukati and his team are the reason we are in this mess. And
I hear you. Let me come to Priscilla and I'll come to you, Mark, briefly. From where Daktari has left us off, will this then really be perhaps the point? Is there evidence? And I don't want us to get into arguing the merits of the case, but the fact that can we prove that tomorrow's election will be in compliance with the court order. Full stop.
Yes, I think it is possible because we are saying IBC, the ballot papers have arrived and they're distributing the ballot papers. But I like your earlier question on whether we postpone this election or not. We are within the 60-day period and we are really dancing with interpretation. I am very, very afraid what will happen to us when we leave the 60-day period, which has even no law beyond 60 days. Up until the 60th day, which is 31st of October, we are very well guided by the Constitution and what happens. That the IEBC, as currently constituted, conducts this election. The chairman, with all our views on him, we can only wish him the best. That this is a big national duty. Kindly take us through this election together. So tomorrow, the point of the country is this. We have so many questions about what happens with these processes. We've got one of the most complex electoral systems around the globe.
Right.
And in terms of this nullification, it is exactly these kind of reasons that make courts fear nullifying a presidential election. Or, you know, very few courts in the world have nullified a presidential election. It is true, sometimes elections are not perfect. It is true, there are different questions. But once you have a clear winner, if you can tell who is a clear winner, you send the clear winner to office and you leave the other issues to be resolved by the democracy. And that is what the Supreme Court should have done. Now, the Supreme Court has already set us to the repeat election. The best we can do for ourselves as a country is go through this repeat election and address all of the other underlying questions after. We are in the spotlight of the world. It will be disaster if we don't have this election tomorrow. Because now the Supreme Court, if it wants to extend time, it will have to be struggling with provisions of law. There isn't a clear provision of law that the Supreme Court can cite as a reason for postponement. What we can do is go through the election and then test the credibility, test the technical preparedness, and you do all of those tests after the election. It is not possible to tell whether it's going to be transparent or not until after the election. Once the election is done and you feel that it was not transparent or it was not credible, that is when we can have this question. So my plea remains the same one I started with. Let's have this election tomorrow.
You know what I find very funny about our country and is from 1992, at which point have we had elections in an environment that was conducive for election? What does that even mean in Kenya? You know, the flavor about being Kenyan is we get into elections every time, and in 2013 we had a holiday for an entire month as we wait for the Supreme Court to rule. What does that tell you? We need to stop and really think about our nation and say, we cannot be in court trying to say what is the conducive environment. Is the IEBC going to be transparent enough? Are we going to judge prophetically that now we are prophesying that the IEBC will let us down? And therefore, let us litigate now. It's like saying, since I know Charles is going to hit me tomorrow, let me sue him today to stop me from hitting me tomorrow. We can't be in that space. We've got to allow processes to run. Let the IEBC run the election. If they run it well, then let's debate that. If they run it badly, let's debate that. But let's not sit in a prophetic seat trying to say that since it is going to be bad, let us stop. We can't tell that. Because what that will do, it will lead us into a situation where we don't know where we're going. And I agree, by and large, the election is not an end to itself. There are many issues that we need to deal with, but we need to have it so that now we have one less thing to worry about as far as our constitution and laws are concerned.
Okay. I just want to bring up speed with news just in, and we again from the courts, we understand that Justice Odunga has ruled that IBC broke the law in the appointment of returning officers. Odunga's decision pretty much meaning that what has happened in terms of the gazettement of those ROs being illegal, what that means with an election expected in a matter of hours. We'll be talking after this. We're going to break. Let's